Good morning to everyone. First of all, I want to express my gratitude to the organizers for the conference and for the subject that I think is very interesting. In the following minutes, I'm going to present two case studies that form part of a branch of the landscape archaeology. This branch or section has been termed an archaeology of natural. Has been termed an archaeology of natural places or an archaeology of unaltered spaces. These expressions were coined 14 years ago by Richard Bradley, and according to him, natural places have an archaeology because they acquired a significance in the minds of people in the past. That didn't necessarily make any impact on their outward appearance, but one way of recognizing the importance of these locations is through the evidence of human activity that is discovered there. All these kinds of different human activities have been recognized for some time. The paradox is that they have been investigated quite independently and as a research project that have little connection with the study of the ancient landscape. I think that this paradox can be perfectly extrapolated to the field of Egyptian studies in many instances. The following examples, the former connected to profane activities and the latter to religious practices, form part of this discourse and comprise similar problems of interpretation. Both examples are set in the Theban area, a landscape that has suggested both to Egyptians and Egyptologists a very rich catalogue of symbolic perceptions and religious appropriations of landscape features. However, as other similar examples in the area, their interpretations and identifications haven't been conclusively accepted by researchers because they are rarely linked to explicit textual and archaeological data. The two spatial features that will be presented here have been spatial features, not spatial, spatial features, have been already noted by some scholars, but they have never been extensively studied or interpreted. Here, I'm going to offer a brief description of them and to suggest possible interpretations that, in any case, cannot be either taken as firm statements, since they are not grounded on explicit evidence and they are based on few occasional visits to these sites. Maybe a more serious archaeological and epigraphic survey could be addressed in the future. But, notwithstanding these limitations, I hope that the information provided here on both sides could serve to create curiosity and discussion. The first feature I'm going to present is formed by a series of low dry stone walls that enclose the gentler slopes of the lower and middle courses of one wadi called Wadi el-Makhtiar, which is at the north of the Valley of the Kings. They have long been known by Egyptologists. They were firstly recorded on a map made by Schweinfurth and published in an article by Blankenhorn in 1902. 7 years later, Schweinfurth included a more detailed cartography of the walls in his Karte der westlichen Umgebung von Luxor und Karnak. And that very year, Petrie described briefly these ramparts and marked them in the plan he published of the Theban northwestern area in the report on his activities in the el-Qurn region. Subsequently, the walls fell into oblivion, even though they were recorded in some topographical maps, some of them in popular tourist publications, such as the Baedeker Guide, this is of 1914. Actually, it's inspired in the map of Schweinfurth. And also in other more scientific and restricted studies. The ramparts were set on both sides of the wadi in order to create an enclosed area, only accessible from its mouth. The walls are only fencing the gentler slopes, and they disappear at its upper course. where high cliffs and very steep slopes act as natural barriers. The study of some stretches of the walls permit to suggest that they were around 1.5 meters at most, high at most. Sorry. Here. Okay. They lacked of doors and towers. Their length extends from a few tens of meters to several hundreds of meters. The ramparts could be connected to some neighboring features. On the southern side of its mouth, far from the beginning of the walls, there are remains of possible pharaonic quarries which were exploited during the same period than the so-called quarries of Hatshepsut and Amenhotep III, which are behind them. But these quarries, these Wadi el-Makhtiar quarries, have been extensively destroyed by modern quarrying activities. A bit farther to the west, on the same site, there are remains of 3 small quarry caves, possibly of the same period. The easternmost one, the anchorite shelter, well, I have given this name, why not? Contains a votive Coptic text. The western shelters, that I have called Amun's shelter and King's shelter respectively, have some carved pharaonic graffiti, with boats, with men and chariots, a roaring hippo, remains of two pair of divinities, and in this pillar, for example, in this place, there is the face of a head of a divine, well, there is a head of a divine ram below, above, sorry, an altar or basin that you can see here. Where is the pointer? Okay, here. And there are also Greek Coptic inscriptions, boats, more Greek inscriptions, graffiti of different periods. And the same happened in the so-called King's Shelter. I have called King's Shelter because there is a kind of smiting scene, but can be another thing, I don't know. There are some animals depicted on the roof. A hunter and his prey, maybe of pharaonic times or later, and also a hunter on chariot, quadrupeds, possibly donkeys, etc. Above these shelters, there is a Roman mudbrick structure. It's very similar to another one placed on the other side of the wadi, which is next to the beginning of the longest section of the wall. Both buildings are quadrangular. According to Petrie, the northern one have walls 7.5 meters long, and the southern one have walls almost 4 meters long. Either Schweinfurth and Petrie dated them into the Roman period. Actually, Petrie found a sherd of late Roman period, of late Roman pottery embedded in a mud brick. Some sherds have been found in the wadi bed close to the shelters, and they seem to be of the late Roman period. There are no other relevant human features in the wadi except for some graffiti of different periods at its middle course. And there is also a small Drystone structure, maybe a watchpost connected to, I think, few New Kingdom pottery sherds. It's not possible to ascertain if these structures were connected to the walls or not. They could be related, for instance, to the Farsut Road, which starts immediately at the south of the wadi. Any interpretation of these ramparts should be connected to other walls attested between Dendera and Deir, and above all, to the ones discovered by Mond and Myers in the area of Armant in the 30s, in the 30s of the past century. Even though the Dendera Drystone ramparts are very similar, they enclose a greater desert area, comprising several wadis and hills. On the contrary, like its Theban counterpart, the Armant walls are enclosing a single wadi. And a wadi which is interrupted by this kind of circus or dry waterfall, which is at the middle, at its middle course. At the mouth of the wadi, there are also several limestone quarries and a small cave that maybe are connected to the walls, but unfortunately, they haven't been published, and I haven't visited the site yet, so everything is on the air. On the other hand, some sections of the ramparts are 3D'd with some features, maybe stone circles, that in any case don't seem to be the remains of towers or bastions. The most relevant site that could be connected to the ramparts is a quadrangular dry stone enclosure, which is about 1 kilometer and 300 meters to the east of the mouth of the wadi. Mond and Myers excavated the site partially, and they found inside this enclosure many interesting things. The enclosure had approximately 100 meters long and had an entrance on its southwestern side. The walls are originally 3 meters thick and only 1 meter and 77 centimeters high. So they don't seem a fortress. The walls are very low. Inside, there were found some Coptic and late Roman tombs, and also several pits with remains of fish rations. One pit also contained traces of dates and cloth, and inside the enclosure, there were found also charcoal, leather, donkey droppings, and at the middle of the enclosure, it was found a 3-winged arrowhead. But there were no pharaonic remains recovered there. It's not possible to establish a secure connection between this enclosure and the wadi ramparts. The entrance of the Armant enclosure runs along the beginning of another desert track, the Nag Hammadi Road, so it could serve, at least in some moments in the Roman period and maybe in the Arabic period, as a kind of caravanserai, something like that. Which could be the meaning of these ramparts and these wadis, these enclosed wadis? As there are no explicit evidence on their use and they haven't extensively studied so far, any interpretation and dating are conjectural. In both cases, the walls are enclosing 2 wadis that apparently have no significant features such as tombs or quarries in their upper courses. On the other hand, they would have little practical function as defenses against invaders or Bedouins, because they are only 1.5 meters high, and moreover, they would defend deserted places. So what's the sense of these walls there? According to their dimensions and emplacement, I think that they would form part of great pens or fences for animals. And these fences could have at least 2 different purposes. First, both wadis could be also used as hunting games. The depictions of chariots, animals, and hunters in the Wadi al-Makhtiar shelters, these motifs are very rare in the Theban mountain, I have to say, above all the chariots, permit to suggest the use of the wadi as a hunting ground already in pharaonic times. Both wadis could have the same function in later periods, too. Actually, the late Roman structures in Wadi al-Makhtiar and in Armant suggest a very late use and probably construction of the ramparts. Unfortunately, the written sources don't mention explicitly hunting activities at Thebes during all these periods. As far as I know, only few Theban ostraca of the 2nd century AD mention attacks for gazelle hunting or kinegidos dorkonon in the area. But these references are not conclusive at all, since they could be related to synergetic activities in other places of the Theban nome. Moreover, these wadis don't seem to be the best place for keeping gazelles, which natural habitat is plainer and wider. If these wadis were employed as hunt reserves, they differ considerably in terms of building and dimensions from other better-known hunting grounds, such as the one detected at Soleb in Nubia from the 18th dynasty, the prehistoric desert kites in the Sinai and Levant, the hunting games of Wadi Hor Abu Zubayra South and Wadi Sheikh Ali, dated respectively from the predynastic and Old Kingdom periods, or the prehistoric stone alignments in the Western Desert. Finally, the ramparts could be used as protective livestock enclosures. The location of both wadis at the beginning of the desert routes towards the Farshut area suggests that they could be used as resting or counting places for animals in transit. But the dimensions of the enclosed areas seems, at least to me, too large for this purpose. So, summing up, I have no idea what these walls are, but I think that the best interpretation are as fences for animals. But if anyone have any other idea, is very welcome. Well, the other feature, how much time? The second feature, the second feature is scarcely connected to any textual and archaeological evidence too. It's formed by two different clusters of small chapels that are located in the eastern foothill of el-Qurn in connection with the huts of the col between the Valley of the Kings and the el-Medina. These chapels have long been known by the Egyptologists, and the southern, bigger cluster was discovered by Norman de Garis Davies and was published by his husband in 1938. The second cluster, apparently overlooked by the Davies, was, as far as I know, first noticed in the publication of the Graffiti de la Montagne, Theban, in 1969. Both clusters have been sporadically mentioned in studies on personal piety in Deir el-Medina, and they have been recorded by the Theban mapping project recently. The first cluster is placed at 2-3 minutes from the huts of the col, above the central eastern part of a small spur between two dry gullies. It's connected to the workers' camp through a narrow pathway, and the lower chapels are only 10-15 meters far from that track. They are scattered along a vertically narrow strip of land. There are approximately 70 or 80 chapels. They are very difficult to count. I have counted them three times, and the 3 times I have got 3 different numbers. So they are very, very difficult to recognize. But possibly there were more, since an electric wire crosses the site and could have destroyed some of them during its laying. The chapels are roughly oriented to the north-northeast and are very simple. So, as you can see, they look like trilithons. They are made of micritic limestone covered by a ferruginous crust which seems rusted iron. The average chapel is 60 centimeters high, and their recesses are frequently rectangular. Currently, they do not contain any significant remain, but when they were discovered, the Davies retrieved some stelae and slabs which mention several Deir el-Medina individuals, which can be dated to the late years of Ramses II to the reign of Ramses IX. I have found some possible remains of several stelae, but they haven't any remains of inscription. Maybe this one has some remains of painting, but it's very difficult to see. Only a small sherd has found close to the path. Following the ascending track westwards, the second cluster is 2–3 minutes far from the first one, and it's set on a convex spur. It's only formed by 6 chapels. As I have told you, it's very difficult to recognize them here. And they are oriented towards the east or northeast-east. Furthermore, all of them contain spherical chert nodules inside their recesses. Again, no pottery or other materials are connected to them, and the only other meaningful features in this spur are several whitish dust or lime-like outcrops. The evidence at hand doesn't permit to interpret clearly the function of these chapels, but they seem to be closely related to the Deir el-Medina community. Their number in the first cluster roughly coincides with the houses either in Deir el-Medina and in the Col. So at first sight, they could be individual chapels for every member of Deir el-Medina. However, we know that the number of inhabitants of the village changed significantly along the time, so the number of houses do not reflect the whole number of workers. Accordingly, the chapels surely reflect a complex and discontinuous history. Probably they weren't created and used at once, but in different moments along several generations. On the other hand, it's not possible to know how often every chapel was used, if only one, frequently, or even during several generations, if there were significant gaps between one use and another one. So we don't know how they were used. I'll try. The divinities mentioned in the remaining stelae found in the first cluster seem to be dedicated to Amon, Re, and one goddess. This diversity suggests that the donors dedicated the chapels to different Theban divinities according to personal reasons and choices. Leaving aside these textual and fragmentary evidences, there are some features connected to other kind of data that can provide some clues for the religious and symbolic significance of these monuments. First, and this is, I think, the most important and remarkable feature, the Karnak temple is visible from the whole area covered by the chapels. Actually, in the first cluster, Karnak is not visible from a lower level than the lowest chapel. This visual contact with Karnak is also observed in the chapel excavated at the south of the Station du Col, which probably was devoted to Ammon. This Karnak connection could reinforce the interpretation of both kinds of chapels as structures with similar intentions, but on a different scale. One, a public or common one in this temple, and another one more private and familiar or individual in the chapels in the different clusters. Second, both clusters of chapels are visually connected, at least partially, to the Station du Col and to the Valley of the Kings. Third, the first cluster seems to be, when observed from the pathway just below it, at the very median of the triangle formed by the summit of el-Qurn, even though these chapels are rather eccentric when they are observed from other places. Here they are. Four, the second cluster, which is not related to el-Qurn, is roughly oriented to the rising sun horizon, so to the east. This fact could explain both the presence of spherical flint nodules as sun images and in its recesses, and the location of the cluster in a place that, contrarily to the first group, seems not to be related to any significant feature of the mountain. And five, the materials related to these chapels could also be a clue for their meaning. As stated above, many of their blocks are covered with a ferruginous crust, which gives them the appearance of some properties of the meteoric iron, a material that was related by the Egyptians to the heaven. Furthermore, some of these ferruginous stones are internally similar or equal to flint. And the flint was also a material that was identified by the Egyptians with this meteoric iron. This fact and the presence of flint nodules inside the chapels of the second cluster seems to reinforce the heavenly connections of these structures, and possibly they can suggest other notions related to regeneration. Well, it doesn't come from the chapels, from the el-Medina, this example. As high places at the feet of the summit of el-Qurn and in visual contact with Karnak, these clusters could be privileged places for a closer relation between the devotees and Amun-Re, or whoever. The reasons, feelings, and rituals involved with their erection cannot be retrieved. The mountains, according to few texts, were, for example, the place for dancing, so for not working, or for extracting a stone, but they were also a place for praising according to different stele and religious graffiti containing invocations to the gods or depicting divinities and worshippers. Unfortunately, there's no document which mentions the creation or use of these chapels. However, and curiously, there are some graffiti scattered in different areas between the Temple of the Coal and the first cluster that depict similar chapels. These drawings, not attested elsewhere in the Theban mountain, could be testimony to these monuments or could work as quick substitutes for them. Well, summing up, I know that at the present, the research cannot bring more eloquent and conclusive results. The stones of the chapels and ramparts are not mute. They are speaking to us, admittedly, but very softly. Thank you very much.